Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live, the show that gives you information, some of the coolest facts about animals around the planet. And we do that with the help of biologists, conservationists, and filmmakers who are working out in the field. Thank you for joining me today. I wish I was coming to you under better circumstances before we get into this. I was wondering whether or not I should go ahead with today's Wild and Live, but I feel like considering everything that's going on in the States at the moment, but I feel like I still want to be able to bring you some joy, some wonder and awe from the natural world, and it goes without saying that I stand with my brothers and sisters out in the States who are fighting against racism and injustice. So with that said, let's get into it. We do have a great guest for you today. He is the program director for Vietnam for Fauna and Flora International. Josh Kempinski, are you wild and live?
Hey, hi Patrick. I am wild and live. I'm alive.
Yeah, great. It's good to be tuning into you and joining you today. You are all the way in Vietnam right now. As the program director for Vietnam and FFI, Vietnam's a country that many of us know as a great tourist destination. It's got great food, but what many people perhaps don't realize is that Vietnam also has incredible wildlife. So for you, what do you think it is about Vietnam that makes it such a special place when it comes to natural beauty?
Yeah, good question, Patrick. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Vietnam, is pretty famous to people for tourism, for food, obviously the Vietnam War, etc. But yeah, Vietnam's actually the 16th most biodiverse country in the world, and yet it covers only 1% of the Earth's surface. So it's a kind of hyper biodiverse hotspot, and a lot of that is actually to do with its geology, its location, its geography. So basically, coming out of the last ice age, most of this part of the world was not forest, but the high mountains on the border between Vietnam remained forest. So you get this kind of reservoir of species, and kind of that drives a lot of endemism. And also Vietnam is the sort of transition point between the sort of humid tropics of what we consider like Southeast Asia, and actually the sort of temperate sort of continental, basically China in the north. So it's also a transition zone. So you kind of smash together all the history and the geography and the topography, and you get this incredible explosion of species.
Sounds incredible. Vietnam has a number of endemic species. What does it mean when we call a species endemic? And can you give us a couple of examples of species that are endemic to Vietnam?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's one of those kind of technical terms, and it's funny, especially when with the disease flying around the world, you hear about pandemics and endemics. What does it all mean?
That's right.
But endemic,
confusing sometimes.
It can, yeah, right. So endemic from a wildlife, from a biology point of view, endemic means that something is only found in one place. So if a species is endemic to Vietnam, it means it's only found in Vietnam. So and yeah, Vietnam has a lot of endemic species. Some big exciting animals like primates, which we'll talk a bit more about later, I know, but also smaller things, butterflies, snails, lots of orchids, plants, some endemic trees even. So really across all species there's endemic wildlife here.
And I suppose that then means if those species are only found in Vietnam, that it's more reason to ensure that the habitats that they occupy are preserved.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, when a species is endemic, it's immediately sort of the highest risk, because if we don't conserve it in Vietnam, that means it's extinct, because of course it's not found anywhere else. So, when you've got a species that's occurring in two or more or even many countries, you've effectively got many different chances to conserve it. Different countries have different approaches, different laws, different cultures even, and each one of them maybe have a better or worse chance of conserving something. But when something is only found in Vietnam, then that's it. It's on us.
Yeah, and some of those endemic species, as the title of this stream suggests, are some of our closest living relatives, primates. How many
Yeah.
primates are found in Vietnam, and how many of them are endemic?
Yeah, so Vietnam has 25 species of primate, which is a lot anyway. I mean, that's a very high number. Not many countries have that many, and certainly not many countries of the size of Vietnam. So it really is a global hotspot for primates. And then of those 25, 11 are critically endangered. That means that 11 are, the closest to being extinct as we recognize as scientists, and 5 of them are endemic. One of those is actually just on the border with China, so it's just technically not endemic. So technically 4, but we refer to 5. And if you take that number of species, that rate of endemism, and also that rate of endangerment, then as primatologists, we normally talk about Vietnam and Madagascar as being the two sort of most important, the most urgent countries for primate conservation. And I think that's really interesting because Madagascar is well known for its primates, all its incredible lemurs and everything else, and no one really knows about Vietnam, and yet they are the two sort of top countries.
I definitely didn't know that. I
Mm.
worked with primates before, made shows about them, and like you said, Madagascar certainly stands out as one of the hotspots for
Mm.
primates. But I never really thought of Vietnam as being a really important habitat or location for primates. Let's find out a little bit more about some of these endemic primate species. There are 5, as you mentioned. And you're going to have to correct me if I get any of these wrong. I'll give it my best
Right.
shot. The Calvit gibbon, the Delacour's
Yeah.
langur, the grey-shanked Duke langur, the
Mhm.
western black gibbon, and the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey. Did I get those right?
Perfect. Wow.
Awesome. Um, let's start with the snub-nosed monkey. Actually, before we go into that, I just want to remind everybody, if you are watching and you do have questions for Josh about primates, about monkeys, apes, please pop them into the chat box below. I can see some of you are there. Ben Harris, if you have a question, please can you ask Seng Han Lim? If you're watching, please get some questions in for Josh. I'm sure that he would appreciate it. So yeah, like I said, let's start with the snub-nosed monkey. They
Mhm.
have a very striking looking face, kind of this like powder, pastel blue color, and a very unusual shaped nose. What do they use? Why do they have such a strange shaped nose?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, and I think the short answer is we don't exactly know why. I mean, of course, there are a few other snub-nosed monkeys in the world, and the others are more famous. You've got the golden Sichuan. You've got the China. Basically, the rest of them are found in China. One just over the border into Myanmar as well. But they are, and obviously our one, the Tonkin stub-nosed monkey, is right on the border with China. So clearly that's their range. It's basically China and the border areas, and they all have these incredible upturned noses. One theory that's been put forward is to do with basically how they breathe and when it's raining and rain gets onto their faces, and then it's easier for them to kind of sneeze the rainwater out because they have these funny noses. I mean, I'm not sure I believe it, but I mean, there must be an evolutionary reason why they have these completely amazing little upturned noses, but I don't think we know is the short answer.
Yeah, I thought it had something to do again with breathing and being able to warm, cool air. Um, Golden snub-nosed monkeys live in habitats which can get very cold in the winter. What about the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey? What's the temperature range in terms of where they live in Vietnam?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think probably that's a yeah. I have heard that theory put forward as well for the Tonkins here, and I think it probably does make sense. I mean, they are in the subtropics here, so it's much warmer than they're not living in snow, but it is cold in the winter. So maybe the same evolutionary processes are there, and this idea of warming the air as it comes in, but yeah, I mean that would make sense. But yeah, I mean it's probably the temperature range for the Tonkins is probably somewhere between about 0 and 30 degrees, 0 and 35 degrees, something like that. So
So it
quite a
does
big
get
range.
to freezing.
Yeah, I think at altitude, I mean we don't get much snow in Vietnam, even in the mountains. But yeah, sometimes it does drop right down.
Gosh, you never
Um,
really think of Vietnam as being able to get down to 0 degrees. That's Really interesting.
Well, in a, yeah, yeah. I mean, and another thing that's interesting about Vietnam, this relates to your first question about all the biodiversity and the endemic species, is the mountains in the north of Vietnam are actually the foothills of the Himalayas. So
Mm.
the Himalayas basically form the border between Myanmar and China and Laos and China. And when they hit Vietnam, of course, they're nothing like what we think of as the Himalayas, but they're still pretty big mountains. I mean, they are the tallest mountain in Indochina is in Vietnam, and it is technically the foothills of the Himalayas. So yeah, it's cold.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, we have a question in from Senghan Lim. He wants to know what is the biggest threat to endangered species in Vietnam. He assumes that potentially it's urban development and poaching. Is he correct?
Yes, I mean, I think he's largely he is correct. It's Vietnam is some sort of the perfect storm in a way of threats to wildlife. There is a lot of poaching. There's demand in Vietnam, obviously consumption of wildlife, but also we're very close to China. Big population, urban development, infrastructure, so deforestation, high population density. I mean, it's basically the full. We're dealing with everything. So when we talk about conservation in Vietnam, it's normally relatively small areas, kind of remote areas, normally actually quite high in the mountains. I mean, lowland forest is mostly gone.
So it sounds like the cause is humans, us messing things
Oh
up.
yeah, yeah, sure. And then if climate change comes as well, then we'll be in real trouble. But, yeah.
Let's move back onto the primate species that we were talking about. I'd love to find out a bit more about what we can do to try and help those endangered species that are under threat. One of the things I like about some of the primate species is the difference between adults and the young babies.
Mhm.
Cat bar langur is a perfect example of this because the parents, the adults, are quite dark in color. The
Mhm.
babies, however, have these cool punk hairstyles and they're completely bright orange.
Yeah,
What's that
yeah.
all about?
That's a good question. Yeah, actually, all of the langurs here, so the Delacour's langur, the Katbar langur, and also some of the slightly less threatened one like the Harting langur, they all have this same coloration, which is interesting. Um, and again, it's the theory we have, but I think it makes this one makes more sense. Is that it's a trade-off between camouflage and predation. So basically, when the adults are mature, it makes much more sense for them to be camouflaged and to try and hide from predators. So they all have a kind of dark, black, bit of white, bit of grey, and you see them, moving along rock faces and in sort of dappled vegetation, and they're quite well camouflaged. Whereas the young ones, of course, being bright orange makes it much higher risk of predation. But actually, the most important thing is that the parents can see them and the parents can find them quickly. So the theory being put forward is when you're an infant, it makes sense to be bright orange so your family can see you very clearly against a rock or against a tree and kind of grab you. And as you grow up, it makes more sense to change. And they do. They change it. They change during sort of early adolescence. They change into much more kind of grayer tones, and then they get darker as they get older. So I think it makes a lot of sense that one.
I was literally going to ask that exact question. Um, in that having a baby that's bright orange surely
Yeah.
makes it easy for a predator to just to spot it and take that young young baby langur. What predators uh, would take a langur?
So probably the two main predators would be large birds of prey, and there is some reports in Katmar that still happens. I think it's one of the sea eagles can take, particularly baby, can take infants, and in other places in Vietnam it would be large cats. So certainly clouded leopards would be a major predator on all primates actually, except well, sadly, the conservation situation here is that clouded leopards are extremely rare, if not maybe no longer found in Vietnam. So, um, actually, so evolutionary terms, it's like that, but really, predation on primates is by people, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main problem. Yeah.
Uh, let's move on. We'll come back onto the. Actually, I've got a couple of questions for you. Which I will,
Okay.
let's deal with those at the end. I
Okay.
You mentioned the the habitat in which they live in. I came across a quote recently that I came across a quote that read, blood is more common than water on Cat Bar Island. What were they referring to?
Brilliant, yeah. Funny enough, I've never heard that quote before, but I love it. It's great. So basically, Kapar Island is pure limestone, and a lot of the species. When we talk about primates in Vietnam, we talk about endemic species in Vietnam. We are often talking about limestone mountains. But one of the features of limestone is because it's full, it's very jagged and full of holes, completely porous. Is one of the features of limestone forest is there's very very little standing water, sometimes none, which means that the animals that are living there, including the primates, have adapted to survive periods where there is basically no water. So particularly in the dry season, there's not even much rain around, let alone any rivers. So what we hypothesize is effectively that a lot of these langur species are getting the moisture that they need from the leaves that they eat, and another word for langur is leaf-eating monkey. So basically, they are getting all the moisture they need from eating leaves. And of course, in the morning, those leaves are often pretty wet, from the mist, from the dew in the morning. So they are getting moisture, particularly in the morning, from their leaves. But where we see langurs living around water, they will drink. So they obviously prefer to drink water, but it seems that they can survive without it, which is amazing. And in Cat Bar, which is something that we've never seen anywhere else, the Cat Bar langurs drink seawater. Now, that's probably not, yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's probably not a good idea. I mean, it's probably not, an optimal diet. They probably should be drinking fresh water, but clearly they can survive. And maybe over the tens of thousands of years, they've adapted to be able to cope with that. But yeah, you see them going down drinking seawater. It's amazing. I mean, it would kill us for sure.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And does that also have something to do with the fact we were talking about these limestone rocks that they live on that are kind of razor sharp? Can you explain to everybody how sharp those limestone karst formations are, and how the langurs are able to so well adapted to climbing on those rocks?
Yeah, that's another great question. Yeah, I mean, again, the quote would fit that perfectly because there is basically no water, and it's incredibly dangerous, sharp rock. So there probably literally is more blood around than there is water, especially in the dry season. But yeah, if you've never been on a limestone, never been on a limestone mountain, like limestone forest, it's kind of remarkable. It's nothing like what we would normally think of as forest, where you are basically walking on the ground between the trees. In a limestone forest, you're constantly walking basically on rocks and stepping between small chasms. It's extremely dangerous, which is why I think wildlife persists in these areas, because it's just so difficult for people to go there and to destroy them, really. But I know a lot of guys over in Vietnam that when they're doing field work in limestone areas, they wear very thick gardening gloves. Because even as you kind of walking and you're kind of semi on all fours and you're walking, yeah, it can cut your hands to ribbons. And a pair of walking shoes that in the UK might last 10 years will probably last you about 6 months if you're working in a limestone environment. Yeah, it's proper jagged, sharp, dangerous stuff. Amazing.
So even with your toughest walking boots, it's going to cut the time, its life expectancy down to 20th of
20th
time. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, our field teams, we buy them. They're bought, some, equipment or uniforms, etc. And they get 2 pairs of shoes a year, and they need that. And also, Patrick, just to answer your other question, it's amazing when you see the langurs up close. The skin on their hands and actually also on their backsides is incredibly tough, like calluses. They basically have a kind of cushion of really hard skin on their bums, basically, so they can actually sit on the limestone. But it's interesting. Some scientists say that, again, it doesn't mean that their preferred habitat is limestone. It seems that they've been able to adapt to it, and they can grow these kind of calluses to deal with the limestone. Maybe we would too if we were living there all the time. Maybe our hands would also toughen up. But realistically, probably a lot of the primates in Vietnam would have been found in other forests, but all those forests are gone. It's just that what's left is these high altitude, often limestone forests. So it's kind of interesting. Are they perfectly adapted for this limestone forest, or is that just all that's left? So, it may be that Cat Bar is not the optimal habitat for a Cat Bar langur, but they can survive there. Maybe they'd ideally like to be in a wetter, less sharp forest. It's kind
Yeah.
of interesting if you think about the long-term processes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't like to have a callousy bum myself. I'd rather have a soft one like I have at the moment. I want to talk about more what it's like to be a conservationist out in Vietnam. We actually have a question about that. So, but we're going to finish on one last question about apes. Um,
Mhm.
this episode is called Amazing Apes. So far, we've only spoken about primate species, monkey species. Um,
Yeah.
let's let's end on an ape.
Okay.
Gibbons
Hmm.
are classified as apes or lesser apes, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
Um, they have one of the most melodious calls in the natural world. How would you describe it to anybody that hasn't heard a gibbon calling?
Yeah, it's an amazing sound. I mean, it really is. After this, session, it'd be great if people could just Google it and look it up because it really sounds like a mixture of. I mean, it's a song. We refer to it technically as a song, like a bird song or even our own singing. And it's very beautiful, but also kind of unusual. It sounds a little bit like it's sort of singing, and it's almost like face staccato. It almost sounds like kind of lasers at one point being shot. I mean, it's really like an amazing sound. And, and yeah, and each gibbon species, of course, has a different song, and that's one of the ways that we tell the species apart. And then all gibbon families, they live like all apes. They live in sort of family groups, and they sing every morning or most mornings, basically to mark their territory, just so it's clear to the other gibbon groups that this is still our area. You stay over there, and of course that avoids conflict. But it's amazing. So individuals will sing if they're on their own, but families will have a family song. And what you'll see is that often one of the parents starts singing, then the other parent, the other adult joins in, they start duetting, and then the infants will kick off as well. And you get this thing which primatologists call the great call. And the great call is when the whole family are at it, all hitting different notes, and it's really remarkable. It sounds like nothing else. It's great.
It sounds like this kind of long, stretched out, whooping call.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand they tend to make those calls early on in the day. Is that correct? And if so, why do they prefer to call early in the morning? What is it about the conditions that are perfect for those calls to travel long distances?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think in terms of just atmospheric conditions and temperature and stillness and the moisture in the air, I think the calls just travel further in the morning. Also, I think it just makes sense that you wake up in the morning and you kind of remind everyone, well, why wait? You wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is remind everyone else that we're here. This is our area. If you can hear this, you're too close, kind of thing. And then yeah, that normally happens at dawn or even pre-dawn. So it's an amazing experience when you're in the forest and you hear them sort of 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and they start singing. But interestingly, they will sing at other times of the day. So if they hear something or something worries them, they will suddenly, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, you suddenly hear a gibbon kicking off. But normally it's in the morning. And if you've ever been to a zoo that has gibbons, they will sing, but of course most of the time you don't hear it because you're not there at 6 o'clock in the morning. But occasionally, if you're lucky, you can hear the gibbons singing at a kind of random time. Um, but yeah, great.
Yeah, you talk about the fact that you can hear these gibbons singing at 6 in the morning or early in the morning, and I'd like to talk about the experience of being out there and seeing Vietnam's wildlife. We have a question which asks Josh would love to know what your daily routine is as a conservationist out in Vietnam for people who aren't necessarily versed in animal conservation work. What is it that
Sure.
you do, and how varied does your day get?
Wow. So I'm the country director here now. So I'm the equivalent of like sort of the headmaster in school or something. So realistically, I spend most of my time in my office doing all manner of communications and emailing people and discussing and planning and talking to donors and talking to the government. And so it's quite desk based. Lots of phone calls, lots of Skype calls, lots of emails. You know, it's funny as you kind of rise up through your career, you end up often in these management positions are kind of quite officey. Um, But conservation is there are 1,000 different jobs in conservation. Some people are very, very field based. They're in the forest the whole time. Some people are doing more lobbying, working with policy or advocacy work. There's awareness raising, communications. I mean, there's so much. But certainly in my career, I started very technical, and I was in the forest a lot. And then as I've gone through sort of the management rungs, I've ended up in my office most of the time. But I still love it because I'm now managing a big program of work, and we are doing a lot of exciting things all over the country. So it's still very rewarding for me. But I am stuck in here most of the time.
I've got 3 more questions for you, Josh, but I'm really glad that you explained to everybody. Great question there as well. That being conservationist comes in many different forms. In fact, I know the person that asked that question is an IT consultant, and so I mean, okay, the 4 questions now. Do you think that whether you're an IT consultant, a lawyer, an accountant, are those jobs that can also be where people can also be conservationists? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And in 2 ways. One way is that if you think of an organization like mine, Fauna Flora International, we have a communications team, we have a legal team, we have a big finance team, we have a lot of people focusing on monitoring, some very scientific work, people with expertise in development and livelihoods and poverty. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into conservation, and I think more and more we realize that you don't just want 100 zoologists in a room like how it used to be. Conservation is basically conservation is about people, about what people are doing, what they should be doing, what they aren't doing. So of course you need biologists and zoologists. Of course that you need that science. That underpins everything we do. But the implementation of our work is very varied. So there's that element. And another way I've seen people start in different careers and then actually end up in quite technical conservation careers. They just retrain, or they've got some transferable skills and they just move across. So, yeah, I mean, there's 100 ways into conservation for sure.
Fantastic. I think that's a great message to send out to everybody. You can be a conservationist regardless of whatever job or talent that you have. We can all do our part and get involved. Okay, 3 questions. One, which is probably 2 short ones and 1 normal one. There appears to be a green movement amongst the youth in Vietnam. In what ways are they mobilizing themselves to spread the message of conservation?
Yeah, it's great. 10, 15 years ago, that barely existed here. I think it's one of those things that really comes with development. Vietnam is now classed as a middle-income country. And as people have more time and education, more money, of course, their interests sort of expand. Young people are really active now. The main way is social media, as you'd expect. Either just engaging with things, posting pictures, commenting, but also lots of groups, lots of these kind of like social media kind of small groups that they're not a fully fledged NGO. They exist in social media, but they are, groups and collectives of people, and and it's exploding, it's mushrooming. They're also using that to also kind of like play a civil society role. So if people see somebody doing an illegal activity, they may not want to confront them because it might be dangerous, or culturally it could be difficult, but they would post a picture on social media, or they would share that with authorities on social media. So that's been great. They're also volunteering, they're doing litter pickups, they're actually joining the NGOs. There are some NGOs, some charities here that are set up by young people, and then other young people kind of join them. Talking to their parents, spreading the word. Yeah, they're getting engaged in so many different ways, and it's really exciting. I think it's one of the biggest changes here.
Fantastic. It sounds like you're doing some great work out there in Vietnam. Last question. I'm going to combine these 2 questions. What's next for FFI, and what are you and your team doing to try and preserve some of these precious habitats? Is there a particular project that you're proud of?
Wow, yeah. I mean, I have to say, working conservation here is not easy. There's a lot of challenges. Referring back to that first question, it's difficult. I think some people, give up hope. But I'm very hopeful. I see a lot of changes with young people, with the government. We now have some support from the corporate and private sector, people funding us. So Vietnam's changing very fast. And I see the trends. The situation is sometimes still quite bad on the ground, but the trends are good or improving. And we do a lot of work here to really, I mean, I can summarize it in two ways. We're buying time. Vietnam will take over. Vietnam will, as a country, drive conservation forward. But it's essential that, of course, animals have not gone extinct. There's still forests left. So I think conservation NGOs are doing a very important job of buying time and saying, here's something to hand over. We're helping to hand over. And the other thing we do is I think we fill a lot of gaps. The government has a national park and nature reserve system, but sometimes they missed areas. Maybe we go and do a survey and we say, wow, one of the world's rarest primates is in this unprotected forest. And we'll drive that process. We'll do the survey. We'll talk to the government. We'll help pay for the gazettement process to designate the new area. So we fill gaps, in capacity, in skills, in knowledge, and we help to buy time. I think that summarizes our work. And of course, on the ground, we train rangers, we do awareness raising, we visit schools, we do all the kind of normal conservation work. But I think a lot of it is about buying time.
I really like that phrase, conservationists like yourself and organizations like FFI buying time. I think that sums it up perfectly. I think we've on the note of time, we've come to the end of this live stream. Before we go, quick question: what is your favorite animal out in Vietnam?
Oh, it's got to be a Tonkin Snub-Nosed Monkey. They're so unique. Yeah, so brilliant. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Josh, look, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I mean, clearly you're super excited about what you do and the animals and locations and habitats that you're trying to protect. And good luck to you. Hopefully we get to meet in person at some point and maybe even work together.
That'd be great. Look forward to it. Thanks, Pat.
Good stuff. All right.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Josh Kempinski from FFI, Fauna and Flora International. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that it was informative. We had another question. What do langurs eat? Josh was saying that they eat leaves. They're leaf-eating monkeys, and that's where they also sometimes get the moisture that they need, the water that they need to survive. That's it for today. Tune in on Friday. We're going to have another Wild and Live for you, and hopefully we can get into it again. I will be back onto the topic of what's going on in the States. I'm trying to figure out a way to express how I feel about the whole thing. I think it's clear that systemic racism and blatant racism in the world needs to end. I'm interested in what happens once this media hype and frenzy dies down. How are we going to move forward as a nation, as a people? So yeah, let's pay attention. Or at least I'm going to be paying attention. But until Friday, we're going to be back. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and I will see all of you next time. Take care.